Okay, this is the lecture for Queer Phenomenology, Chapter 2, Sexual Orientation by Sarah Ahmed. I'm diverging from my previous lectures um, by using some keywords and key concepts for this lecture. So a few of the ones that I picked out from the many that I could pick out are arrivant, sensuous certainty, orientation devices, and straightening devices. The idea of disappearance, background, and breaking points. So to get started on arrivant, this is an idea that Ahmed gets from Derrida. This concept first appears in chapter 1 as a term coined by him. I have a little bit of info about Derrida here. Born 1930 in LBR, a suburb of Algeria, which was then colonized part of France into a Sephardic Jewish family. He died in 2004, famous for deconstruction. Um, and this is a quote from Ahmed, how is the object in Derrida's terms an arrivant? For Derrida, the arrivant signifies the perhaps of the what arrives. As he puts it, what is going to come, perhaps, is not only this or that, it is at last the thought of the perhaps itself. The arrivant will arrive perhaps, for one must never be sure when it comes to arrive, but the arrivant could also be the perhaps itself, the unheard of, totally new experience of the perhaps. To say that the object is an arrivant is to signal not only that it is nearby, but also that its nearness is not simply given. I did not really understand this. But then I dug into Ahmed's sources. Two books by Derrida that she cites. One is The Politics of Friendship, and the other is Aporia's. And in the first, I found the arrivant in the context of friendship, the perhaps of friendship, and its relationship to futurity. In the second, I found the arrivant described as someone or something who comes where they are not expected. Quote, whoever comes, arrives, and crosses the threshold, the immigrant, the emigrant, the guest, or stranger. But also someone or thing so unexpected they trouble the idea of the threshold itself. And this is what Derrida refers to as the absolute arrivant. So with these in mind, let's turn back to the second appearance of the arrivant in queer phenomenology. And so this is arrivants in chapter 2. The heterosexual couples who gather around the table could be understood as arrivants in the terms I discussed in the previous chapter. It has taken time and work to achieve this form, even if that work disappears in the familiarity and oneness of the form itself. To see the couple form in its sensuous certainty as an object that can be perceived would be not to see how this form arrives as an effect of intergenerational work. And then because for some reason I made a PowerPoint for this lecture, I thought, well, okay, you have to have images. So this is a clip art of the couple form in its sensuous certainty. So this brings us to our next term. Aside from being fun to say, uh, sensuous certainty. This is a concept that shows up a few times in chapter 2. First, at the end of the quote about the arrivant, to see the couple form in its sensuous certainty as an object that can be perceived would be not to see how this form arrives as an effect of intergenerational work, and then again on page 89 regarding wedding gifts. Um, the public event of the marriage entails giving gifts to the heterosexual couple, giving the woman as gift to the man, or even giving the couple as a gift to others, to those who act as witnesses to the gifts given. This object acquires its force through this relay of gifts given. It is not just that it arrives here as a gift, but that in arriving it makes visible the other gifts that give the form of the couple its sensuous certainty. And this had me asking, as with Derrida, like, what is this Marx and Engels text where Ahmed gets the term, and how does that context influence her use of it? So the text is their early work, The German Ideology, Written around 1845 and unpublished until the 20th century, I think in the 1930s. Sensuous certainty appears where Marx and Engels are arguing with the philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach. And this is from Marx and Engels. He does not see how the sensuous world around him is not a thing given from direct from all eternity, remaining the same, ever the same, but the product of industry and of the state of society, and indeed in the sense that it is an historical product, the result of the activity of a whole succession of generations, each standing on the shoulders of the preceding one, developing its industry and its intercourse, modifying its social system according to the changed needs. They continue, even the objects of the simplest sensuous certainty are only given him through social development, industry, and commercial intercourse. The cherry tree, like almost all fruit trees, was, as is well known, only a few centuries ago transplanted by commerce into our zone, and therefore only by this action of a definite society in a definite age, it has become sensuous certainty for Feuerbach. So, in other words, sensuous certainty seems to be Marx and Engels' way of insisting that the apparently given nature of the world is quite often the effect of work. And the implication is that when we apprehend something with our senses, i.e., do the work of the sensuous, we might mistake it as something that has just always been that way, something given. So, for example, I was trying to think of ways that this shows up and also ways that might be related to this chapter that deals with sexual identity. So you might think that couples had always walked down the aisle to Mendelssohn's Wedding March in C major, or that pink and blue were always, you know, given in their, given and self-evident and always already present in their associations when they weren't. And they're the effect of work. So, going back to Ahmed, it makes total sense for her to use this term, since one of her main preoccupations is showing the invisible and intergenerational work, like gift giving, that goes into making phenomena, like the heterosexual couple, seem natural. Quote, what intrigues me here is not so much how sex, gender, and sexual orientation can get out of line, which they certainly can and do, but how they are kept in line, often through force, such that any non-alignment produces a queer effect. So this is just a brief aside here. As with the rest of this book, and especially in this chapter, the the field of social activity and the work that produces and reproduces it is figured through lines and points converging and diverging. So the force to which Ahmed refers is applied through straightening devices. And these are a subset of the general term of an orientation device. The straightening device is Ahmed's term for the repetition of actions as tending towards certain objects that disciplines a slant, or an oblique angle, for instance. And this is how Ahmed thinks of queerness in spatial terms as slant or oblique, into a straight line. So one of Ahmed's examples, she gives a couple of personal anecdotal examples, one of which is arriving with her partner to a room in which there are many, many tables all filled with straight couples. And then another example of this is the neighbor who asks if she and her partner are sisters or, quote, husband and wife. And about this, she says, we can return to my opening quote from Merleau-Ponty. It is the ordinary work of perception that straightens the queer effect. In a blink, the slant of lesbian desire is straightened up. And you might say that straightening devices and compulsory heterosexuality, which Ahmed also treats, bear within them a wish that queerness, or anything slant, disappears in order to keep the conventional family home as that which is immediately visible and within reach. And I've put on a little clip art of hair straightener, because that's what I think of when Ahmed says straightening devices. And Ahmed says, in the face of what appears, we must ask what disappears. And this is one of the things I appreciate most about Ahmed, is that, just her relentless desire to question the apparently given, and really frame it as an effect of work, of the disciplining, of desires that people think of as aberrant into back into something normative. So Ahmed, following the tradition of phenomenology, takes the figure-ground distinction, the figure as object of our focus, and the ground against which it appears, and out from which it becomes discernible. And she extends this to the social world and the labor that gets bracketed, or which Husserl, remember him, would argue, and Ahmed would disagree with, needs to be bracketed to focus on an object of study or an object of desire or other scrutiny. But this is also just one way that Ahmed thinks of the ground or background. It figures in other more complex ways, such as with regard to the temporality of the normative family in its desire to reproduce itself. So, in the context of the heterosexual couple, for Ahmed, they themselves become a point along a line which is given to the child as its inheritance or background. The background is not simply behind the child, it is what the child is asked to aspire toward. The background, given in this way, can orientate us toward the future. It is where the child is asked to direct its desire by accepting the family line as its own inheritance. And my image that I have in the background of this quote is a tree, a drawing of a tree with a genealogical, family tree superimposed on it. But this actually doesn't fully account for the how you might spatially or like visually register what Ahmed's describing, which actually is kind of circular. It's this thing where, the couple is the past and the couple is also the future. But in order to make that manifest, it requires work. So this brings us to the queerness of queer phenomenology. What are the breaking points? So if, for Ahmed, social life figures in the form of points and lines converging, and normative heterosexuality as a gift we are under pressure to accept, what about divergence? Quote, these places where we are under pressure don't always mean we stay online. At certain points, we can refuse the inheritance. At points that are often lived as breaking points, we do not always know what breaks at these points. But that break does not simply happen definitively once and for all. Ahmed again, it can take a lot of work to shift one's orientation. To move one's sexual orientation from straight to lesbian, for example, requires re-inhabiting one's body. And this is where Ahmed gets into the idea that sexual object choice is sticky, in that you think that it's just about the sexual object, but it actually pulls other things about our life world with it. It affects what we can do, where we can go, how we are perceived, and so on. And this could also be put in the negative, because Ahmed also alludes to the risk and the discrimination involved in queerness. So you might also say it affects what we can't do, where we can't go or can no longer go, how we are perceived, and so on. And that's just a few of the keywords from this chapter. I haven't traced the sort of trajectory of some of the psychoanalysis and sexology that forms some of the background for Ahmed. Freud's reading of the case study of lesbian desire, and Havelock Ellis's sexological framework. But this is something that we can talk about when we meet. But suffice to say that this plays a similar role to, for example, Merleau-Ponty and Husserl and Heidegger, in that, the canon of work around sexual orientation um, is something that Ahmed approaches in order to locate queer moments within something apparently, normative and authoritative, and to, yeah, she locates queer moments within that, and then she also, takes uh, these sort of disciplinary straightening devices, um, and marks them as the point on the disciplinary line where she diverges.